This is the story of how Hollywood's biggest box office star of the late 1970s and early 1980s went from a reported $60 million fortune to fighting foreclosure on his Florida home, and what the number 11 million actually means in the Burt Reynolds story. The $11 million connected to his Florida estate was not the amount raised at auction. It was the amount he owed when bankruptcy finally caught up with him in December of 1996. And the auctions that followed over the next 2 decades raised a fraction of that figure. Understanding the gap between those two numbers tells you everything. $60 million earned, $11 million owed at the moment of collapse. A Golden Globe sold for $21,000. A $15 million mansion that went for $3.3. That gap is not filled by auction proceeds. It is filled by decades of decisions. And this is the story of how each one landed. The kingdom he built. For 5 consecutive years, from 1978 through 1982, Burt Reynolds held the title of the #1 box office draw on the planet, and no other actor came close. Smokey and the Bandit launched the run in 1977. The films kept arriving, and the money followed. A single picture, The Cannonball Run, reportedly paid him $5 million, and his fortune at its height has been estimated at approximately $60 million, which translates to something closer to $150 million in today's dollars. Reynolds spent it with the confidence of a man who genuinely believed the income would never stop, and what he built in Jupiter, Florida reflected that belief at every corner. Around 1968, well before his name meant anything at a box office, he purchased 153 acres in Jupiter Farms, reportedly from heirs connected to Al Capone, according to the Tampa Bay Times. What grew on that land over the following decades was less a property than a private universe, containing 2 sound stages, a working airstrip, 7 ponds, a feed and hardware store, a petting zoo, and a chapel where he married Lonnie Anderson on April 29, 1988. Parts of Smokey and the Bandit 2 were filmed on those grounds. Separate from the ranch sat Valhalla, a Mediterranean waterfront mansion in Hobe Sound measuring 12,538 square feet on roughly 4 acres of intracoastal waterway frontage. Valhalla came with a 20-seat private movie theater, a billiard room, a swimming pool, a private beach, a boat dock, a hair salon, a helicopter landing pad, and a yacht dock. And at one point, Reynolds listed it for $15 million. None of that was the full picture. He opened the Burt Reynolds Dinner Theater in Jupiter in 1979 and ran it for a decade. He co-invested in Posthumous, a country-style restaurant chain. He owned a nightclub in Atlanta called Burt's Place, a Fort Lauderdale restaurant called Burt and Jack's, and a stake in the Tampa Bay Bandits football team. At his peak, Reynolds was not simply a wealthy actor. He was a one-man economic ecosystem spread across the state of Florida, and when the income stopped, every piece of that ecosystem started bleeding. The decline. No single decision destroyed Burt Reynolds financially, and that is part of what makes the story worth understanding. The collapse came from several directions at once, and by the time the damage was visible from the outside, it had been building for years from within. Posthumous fell apart in the late 1980s, taking an estimated $15 million of Reynolds' money with it, and total restaurant-related losses across all his food ventures have been estimated as high as $30 million. The nightclub closed. The Tampa Bay Bandits folded along with the entire USFL. After 1985, his box office numbers fell away sharply. The fast-car Southern comedies had run their course, and his earning power shrank to a fraction of what had been sustaining everything. By 1994, Reynolds was telling interviewers he carried approximately $11 million in debt and paid roughly $1 million a year just to stay current on what he owed. Bankruptcy, according to people around him, had been the rational option for years, but Reynolds resisted it on the grounds that walking away from a debt was dishonorable. His father's philosophy had been simple, and Reynolds described it directly: pay them. That changed when the Anderson divorce entered the picture. Reynolds and Lonnie Anderson had married in April of 1988 in the chapel on his Jupiter ranch, 2 stars at roughly the same altitude, and the image held for a few years. Separation came in 1993. The divorce finalized in 1994, and the settlement required Reynolds to pay $2 million in alimony and marital property distribution, plus $15,000 per month in child support for their adopted son, Quinton. Some outlets have claimed the settlement reached $10 million, but that figure conflicts with contemporaneous reporting, and the documented numbers are $2 million plus the monthly obligation. The real financial damage was not the settlement amount, it was how long the dispute ran. Legal fees accumulated year after year, arrears piled up, enforcement actions followed, and the whole machinery of the divorce consumed money Reynolds could not afford for 22 years. The final payment came in September of 2015, when Reynolds wrote a check for exactly $154,520.98 to Lonnie Anderson, closing out the last of the alimony arrears more than 2 decades after they had separated. Bankruptcy. December of 1996 was when the math finally won. Reynolds filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in Florida, and the numbers in the filing were plain. Assets of approximately $6.65 million set against liabilities of approximately $11.2 million, leaving him roughly $4.5 million underwater before accounting for ongoing divorce obligations or the cost of maintaining his Florida properties. The creditor list stretched wide. CBS had sued him over an unpaid $3.7 million loan tied to his television series Evening Shade. Chase Bank held claims against him, as did the Creative Artists Agency and the William Morris Agency. The IRS appeared among his creditors, though the precise dollar amount of any specific federal tax lien filed against Reynolds was never publicly itemized in available records. What surfaced in 2011 was California placing him at number 247 on its tax delinquency list, with approximately $225,000 owed in back taxes from the same period. And then there was the toupee maker, owed $121,000. That single line from the bankruptcy filing became shorthand for the whole story. A man who had collected $5 million for a single film had somehow run a 6-figure tab on hairpieces. Reynolds came out of bankruptcy in 1998, and the timing of what helped him is worth noting. While still working through the proceedings, he appeared in Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights, playing Jack Horner, a pornographic film director, and delivered the best-reviewed performance of his career. An Academy Award nomination followed, and a Golden Globe win for Best Supporting Actor. For a brief stretch, it genuinely looked like Reynolds had pulled off something rare, financial and artistic rehabilitation at the same time. The Oscar did not come. Reynolds held on to that Golden Globe for 16 years, and when he finally sold it in 2014, it brought $21,760. Foreclosure and the road to auction. Coming out of bankruptcy did not end the trouble. It reset the clock, and the clock started running again almost immediately. The Jupiter Farms ranch was sold during the proceedings, having been listed under court order for $4.65 million, and Reynolds settled into Valhalla as his primary residence. Valhalla, by that point, was becoming a burden the income could no longer support. Reynolds listed it for sale as early as 2006, and by 2009, the asking price had dropped to $8.9 million, down sharply from the original $15 million. No buyer came. On September 1st, 2010, Reynolds made what turned out to be his last mortgage payment on the property, and on August 9, 2011, Merrill Lynch Credit Corporation filed for foreclosure, claiming he had defaulted on a $1.2 million mortgage. Bank Atlantic held a second mortgage of $750,000 on top of that. When the foreclosure became public, Reynolds spoke to ABC News, and his words are worth quoting directly. "I am as surprised as everyone. I thought my career and my life could not be going better. I know it is not the end of the world. There are a hell of a lot of other people worse off than I am, and my heart goes out to them. An anonymous source offered a starker picture of the property itself, telling reporters that the house was falling apart and the land was what held the value. A home with a helicopter pad, a yacht dock, and a 20-seat movie theatre, falling apart while its owner fought a foreclosure action on a $1.2 million mortgage. The 2014 action. With the foreclosure unresolved and the Anderson divorce still consuming money and legal energy, Reynolds made a decision in 2014 that the entertainment press greeted with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. Working through the summer with Martin Nolan, the executive director of Julian's Auctions, Reynolds personally curated a sale of more than 600 lots drawn from a lifetime in film and celebrity. Nolan described the process carefully. With somebody like Burt, where he's 78 years of age, he decides to simplify and downsize and do it while he's still in control. December 11th and 12th, 2014, at the Palms Casino Resort in Las Vegas. That is when the bidding opened and closed, with a total of approximately $2.5 million raised across the 2 days. The 1977 Pontiac Trans Am from Smokey and the Bandit led the catalogue and sold for $450,000, a number that felt right to anyone who had watched Reynolds and Jerry Reed tear across the South with a trailer full of Coors beer. Behind that headliner, the prices told a quieter story. The Golden Globe from Boogie Nights sold for $21,760. The Canoe from Deliverance, the film that had started everything, brought $17,920. A gold pocket watch Sally Field had given him went for $13,750. Custom parade saddles from his Bolin collection brought between $43,000 and $46,000. Reynolds told Entertainment Tonight, "I am simply selling some of my memorabilia that I have enjoyed for so many years but have no use nor room for anymore. Quite frankly, I am sick of having so many pictures of myself in my own home." A Grantland journalist who covered the auction in person called it the big, sad, strange Burt Reynolds memorabilia auction, and that description captured something the bidding paddles and casino lighting could not disguise. A Dolly Parton gifted stagecoach from the 1988 wedding, marked with his BR monogram, went to whoever bid highest. 40 years of a Hollywood life, itemized and priced. The $2.5 million covered ongoing obligations. None of it saved Valhalla. The sale of Valhalla. Over Labor Day weekend of 2015, Valhalla sold for $3.3 million to Charles Modica, a former WXEL public radio trustee, and that sale price against a peak listing of $15 million represents a decline of more than 78% from what Reynolds had once believed the property was worth. Attached to the transaction was a divorce-related lien that had been sitting on the property since 1998, meaning the home had carried that legal encumbrance for 17 years before the sale cleared it. In the same month the sale closed, Reynolds wrote that final check to Lonnie Anderson, $154,520.98, the precise amount needed to close out the remaining alimony arrears after 22 years. 2 decades of obligations settled at the same moment the keys to his Florida mansion changed hands. Reynolds was 79 years old when both transactions closed. The Jupiter Farms Ranch, where he had been married and filmed movies and kept a petting zoo, was already gone. Now Valhalla was gone too. Both of the great Florida properties had left his name on the same deeds and entered someone else's. The final auction. Reynolds died on September 6, 2018, in Jupiter, Florida, the town that had held his theater, his ranch, his chapel, and the home he called Valhalla. He was 82. His estimated net worth at death was roughly $5 million, a figure that, given the complexity of his finances across 3 decades, should be understood as an approximation. 9 months after his death, Julian's Auctions held a posthumous estate sale on June 15th and 16th, 2019, at the Standard Oil Building in Beverly Hills. These were the objects Reynolds had kept through everything. What survived the 1996 bankruptcy, the 2014 auction, and every financial pressure in between. A 1979 Trans Am, his last personally owned one, custom built by Bandit Movie Cars, led the 2019 catalogue and sold for $317,500. The original signed Smokey and the Bandit screenplay, all 386 pages of it, brought $37,500. A Bandit-era CB radio sold for $25,000. His personal 35mm print of Smokey and the Bandit went for $21,875. A signed Clint Eastwood Unforgiven poster, personally inscribed to Reynolds, sold for $19,200. NPR reported that Reynolds had kept 20 personal copies of his 1972 Cosmopolitan centerfold, the photograph he believed had cost him an Oscar, and those went to the highest bidders too. And then there was the desk, which is the detail that stays with you. Someone had taken the front end of a 1979 Trans Am, converted it into a working desk, had Reynolds sign it, and it became a piece of his daily life. That desk sold at his estate auction for $4,375. The most iconic car of his career, turned into office furniture, sold 9 months after his death for $4,300. What happened to the land? Palm Beach County rezoned the old Jupiter Farms ranch land for residential use in April of 2014, the same month Reynolds was working with Julian's on the memorabilia sale, and the land eventually passed to home builder Kay Hovnanian. Between 2020 and 2021, Kay Hovnanian built a gated luxury community of approximately 30 single-family homes on the site, with lots ranging from 1.5 to nearly 2 acres. The development needed a name, and the name they chose was Reynolds Ranch. The chapel where Reynolds married Lonnie Anderson in 1988 is gone. The airstrip is gone. The sound stages are gone. The petting zoo is gone. 30 luxury homes in a gated community now occupy the ground where all of it stood, and the only thing connecting that address to Burt Reynolds is the name on the entrance sign. Return for a moment to the number that opened this video. $11 million. Not the auction total, the bankruptcy debt. Reynolds listed approximately $11.2 million in liabilities when he filed in December of 1996 against a peak fortune estimated at $60 million. And at the time of his death in 2018, his net worth sat at roughly $5 million. Between those three numbers lies a ranch sold in bankruptcy proceedings, a mansion that went for $3.3 million against a $15 million asking price, a Golden Globe auctioned for $21,760, and a divorce settlement that ran for 22 years and ended with a check for $154,520.98. Restaurant losses estimated between $15 and $30 million. A football team, a nightclub, a career slowdown that cut the income without cutting the overhead. A divorce that cost not just the settlement, but decades of legal fees and arrears. Federal and state tax obligations that accumulated while everything else came apart. Each of those factors contributed, and none of them alone would have finished him. What runs underneath all of it is a particular kind of stubbornness that Reynolds himself described through his father's voice. Pay your debts. He resisted bankruptcy for years while the math got worse, kept the properties running past the point where the numbers supported it, and kept trying to work his way out of a hole that had been getting deeper since the late 1980s. That quality, the refusal to accept the situation until the situation forced his hand, cost him more than any single investment. Reynolds was not the first person to earn a fortune and spend it with the certainty that more would follow. And he was not the last. But few people have done it at this scale, in this place, over this many decades, with much of it documented in auction catalogues and bankruptcy filings and foreclosure notices. The Trans Am from Smokey and the Bandit sold for $450,000. The Golden Globe from Boogie Nights sold for $21,760. The canoe from Deliverance sold for $17,920. Somewhere in Jupiter Farms, Florida, on land that once held sound stages and an airstrip and a chapel and a petting zoo, 30 luxury homes sit behind a gate with a sign that reads Reynolds Ranch. That is the story. Thank you for watching.